Let's talk about distributed consensus. Distributed consensus is the idea that we have to have a way of coming to an agreement in order to make decisions. The most obvious example of distributed consensus is democracy instead of monarchy. We don't have one person at the top making decisions. We have all the people pretty much get a vote, and then they vote on representatives, and then they vote, and they have to get a certain minimum number to pass a law. Okay, whereas monarchy, king or queen just says, hey, this is what I want to happen, and it happens. So distributed consensus is about this idea of voting. And this is how Bitcoin works. So let's get into exactly how Bitcoin does that. We have this idea of a ledger. Okay, but obviously this is not a single page document. This over time gets longer and longer. So how does that work with Bitcoin? Well, every 10 minutes, a new block is formed, which is basically like a new page. So the first page is called the Genesis block, and it's the first page of transactions. Okay. So every 10 minutes, a new page is formed, regardless of whether all the space on that page has been used or not. Bitcoin is set so that every 10 minutes, a new block is formed. Now, the question is, how do we decide on which block is going to be created next? And the block is usually visualized like this. Okay, so this is block 1 or page 1. This is page 2 of the ledger. This is page 3. Page 4, etc. So the way it works is that let's say these 3 are formed and this one is being formed right now. In the next 10 minutes, this one's being formed. So what happens is there's a bunch of Bitcoin computers out there called nodes that are collecting all the transactions. Everyone in the Bitcoin network, which is like, you can imagine a hall of Congress or the legislature in your country. All those people are talking amongst each other and debating things and spreading information from one person to the next in a big, network that's interconnected. And you have connections between each one of them. So all of these people are saying, oh, this person gave this much money to this other person. This person gave, A gave $10 to B, C gave $20 to D. All of these transactions get exchanged inside and sent around the network via a gossip like protocol or method. Just like people gossip in the real world, information gets passed. The same exact process works in the Bitcoin network. So, did you hear Alice gave a huge Christmas present to Bob? Did you hear Charlie stole $20 from David? Those are transactions back and forth. There isn't really a concept of stealing money in Bitcoin, only of giving. So Alice gave $20 to Bob, Charlie gave $100 to David. David gave $20 to Alice. So we have some transactions going on. Those go into here. So David then gave some Bitcoin to Alice. So I think we had $10 here, $100 here, and then $20 here. Okay, so these are all transactions, and what happens is there's certain people participating in here that are just regular users, and then there's nodes that are like big time users that are actually that are called miners, and they're in charge of actually keeping track of everybody else's transactions and creating a new page or a new block. And they compete and they get a reward. So when Bitcoin started, the reward was 50 Bitcoins. And right now, as of 2018, it's 12.5 Bitcoin as the reward. So there's a transaction at the top of each page that says, the Bitcoin God gave the miner 12.5 Bitcoin. And that's how new money comes into the Bitcoin system. When the first page or Genesis block was created, that's how the first 50 Bitcoin were created. There were 0 Bitcoin in existence in the entire world until this first block was created. Okay, so distributed consensus is about taking all these transactions that are happening, all these nodes, all these miners, they all have a page like this that they're trying to create. Okay, and those transactions may be in slightly different order. For this person, it's A to B, and then C to D, and then D to A. For this person, it might be C to D was the first one they heard about, and then A to B, and then D to A. This person may have heard of D to A first. David gave Alice, $20? And then C to D, and then A to B. Okay, so they may have the transactions in different orders, but they're all trying to collect all the transactions. Now, how do we decide whose block to use? That's the consensus problem. That's the voting problem. Okay, so in Bitcoin, we use proof of work. And it's basically a competition for each miner to take this block, this page of transactions, and turn it into basically solve a computational puzzle that's difficult. And the first person to solve that puzzle is the person that wins the official block. So, okay, we decide that this block is the official block, and all the other ones are not the official one. And then this miner sends that official winning block to the other miners. And then they use that, and then they create page 5 based on that official version of page 4. So the way you win in a democratic system is you win the majority of votes. That's not really how Bitcoin works. The way Bitcoin works is you basically fight it out. And this was actually an option, if you know the history of law going back many hundreds of years, a court of law, you could do a trial by fighting. And 2 people who had a disagreement would go into court, and instead of settling it with a lawsuit, they would, and a jury or a judge, they would both get their swords and they would just fight, and whoever won. Kind of like a gladiator battle. So all of these miners are fighting for who's going to have the reward, who's going to be the official block, and then that gets added to this official chain of blocks. So the blockchain is that stack of all the official pages of transactions that were created. And we're going to talk about more what you may be wondering, well, how does this puzzle thing work? How do you win here? We're going to talk more about that later in the course. What's important is you understand that this is the process for distributed consensus. And the consensus is whoever solves the problem first, they send their solution out to the other people in the network. And then the incentive is that you don't want to try to continue solving for page 4 if somebody else has already found the solution, because that's going to put you behind everyone else. Let's say a minute later, you come up with your winning, you solve the puzzle for your version of page 4. What's going to happen is everyone else has already been trying for a minute to create page 5. And so when you try to create your page 5, you're going to be a minute behind. You're going to be at a disadvantage to solving this puzzle. Because remember, there's a new puzzle for each page or each block. And so you're less likely to win the free Bitcoin that come from winning page 5, and so on and so on. And the way people decide, the way miners decide which blockchain is the real blockchain is which chain is the longest. And so if you're working on something where somebody else already won that block, your chain is going to be shorter and nobody's going to choose your chain.